and the universe itself is nothing but an accident, or a kind of a bomb which keeps on expanding and one day will burst. We just cannot live. We cannot have a family life. We cannot have a political system. What is going now on with Watergate and all this is, to me, a direct result of this great tragedy of modern man who has stopped living with God and he cannot live without him. Because if there is no God...
Excuse me, I must break in.
Yes.
I think we're diverging from
the book.
Joseph K. And the trial. I'd like to raise a couple of questions. One, Kafka has been called an expressionist. The expressionists basically are writing from the belly. They're writing about emotions. They're trying to take emotions and they're trying to put it into language. And I think that we've gone into some of the causation. I don't think we've talked enough about the expression of the emotions themselves. In other words, the one thing that we really get from reading this book, aside from the mystery of it, there's a sense of hopelessness, a sense of helplessness. There's, at times, the man is passive to his fate. At times, he's very brash. He's fighting. He has that courage Dr. Lowen speaks about, but at other times, he's extremely passive.
Yes.
He gives up.
Yes.
Well, I don't think he gives up. I think what he does is start to think. He tries to find a way out by thinking his way out, then he can't act. But other times, he makes very strong actual physical moves. He bangs his fist on the table. And I think the tendency of modern times, if you realize, and this goes way back to before Kafka, to Freud really, is to slowly introduce the value of the emotional life back into people's way of being. Whereas at Kafka's time, certainly around the turn of the century, the reason in the mind, was elevated to such a degree that emotional acting, except within the limits prescribed, by the culture, was really taboo. See, and over the last, I would say, since the First World War, there has been a really tremendous effort on the part of humanity to free up the emotional life of people. And I admit that it, on the one hand, it's produced a chaotic situation today, but on the other hand, if this condition that Joseph K. is in had become any more, set, structured, we would all have to end up with the fate of Joseph K. And I think we don't appreciate how much the book is telling us about the conflict that exists in every person as to how much can you act impulsively and how much do you have to think it out, and how do you resolve these problems.
But there's also the question here of if it is expressionism, in other words, his way of writing to describe the emotions. This is, to me, also a literary problem. The literary problem is this, that while man is actually made of emotions, emotions are the very essence of man. Take away his emotions and he's nothing. The language for emotions is very poor. In other words, let's say when you look into a dictionary, you will see that there are thousands and thousands of nouns for things, for specific things. Let's say you say this apparatus here, the mouthpiece has a different name and the food has a different name. But when it comes to emotions, there are only a few hundred words to describe all emotions. There is such a thing. You say love and pity. The language is poor in describing emotions. The reason for this is that men never, until in late times, men never had a need for it. If we said that a girl is beautiful, or that you love the girl, this was it. The old writers did not really care to describe what kind of a love it was, and that there are millions of kinds of love. In other words, to describe the emotions, while the emotions are very important in life, the description of emotions are so much behind in literature that you can never really describe them directly. You have to describe them, so to say, indirectly.
Isn't that the very nature of the role of words themselves? In other words, words are a product of the mind. See? So that it's only by indirectly that you try to fit words to feeling.
Exactly. When it comes now, I would say that the language is very strong in describing concrete things, and also, but when it comes to abstract things, and especially to emotions which are not really abstract, there is no individuality in the language of emotions. And the writer, if he tries to describe emotions, he cannot just say he loved the girl, but what do we know? There are millions of kinds of love.
The great art of Kafka,
yes,
in The Trial particularly, is that he creates the strongest emotional field with the greatest understatement.
And do you know why? Because he doesn't describe it directly. He really always gives facts. He goes to a lawyer, he waits. Kafka, while he is kind of an abstract writer or a dream kind of writer, he's very concrete in facts, just as the dream is. Because you see in a dream a piece of nonsense, but this piece of nonsense is described in such details that you wake up, you are all wrought up by it.
And as you know, in psychoanalysis, every one of those details can be elaborated through association until finally you really reveal the story of a man's life, just by taking the details of the dream and the mood of the dream.
This was the wonderful thing about Kafka.
Well,
Isn't that true of every great writer? Now, Shakespeare certainly played with emotions. The emotions in Shakespeare's plays are tremendous.
But there were a known field.
But there's
they were played with in
I will tell you,
form.
in Shakespeare there was not much detail. But when you read such writers like Cervantes or Flaubert or Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, there is an abundance of detail. In other words, when Dostoevsky tells you that Raskolnikov loved Sofia, it wasn't just love. It's a specific kind of love, an individual kind of love, which has never been before and will never be after. And in this respect, Kafka shares the greatness of the great writers. No matter what he is trying to say, he says it in a great detail.
And yet without over-elaborating the inessential details, because there are some modern writers who also tell you so much detail that you end up with no sense of what the basic feeling is.
I will tell you what is wrong with these writers, because they really don't describe individual sex, they describe sex generally. While they imagine that they describe individual sex, they are mistaken. When you read these sex writers, actually what they say is something which applies almost to everybody. And if it applies to everybody, it has no literary value. While such a writer like the Norwegian Knut Hamsun, when he was young, when he wrote well, or even in Kafka's case, he describes specific cases, because literature is built on the idea that just as our fingerprints are different, so our characters and every event of our life is different. The detail tries to reveal.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Singer. If guilt, as it's portrayed by Kafka, cannot be resolved, in a sense, and as in this case cannot be really lived with either, and if you say that guilt is necessary to man, what do you offer him? You have to offer him either a belief in a God, which you do, I know that, or if he can't find that, he's doomed, as you say.
Well, I will tell you, it is not actually the duty or the power of literature to offer you something. It cannot. Because if I describe, let's say, you a case, I describe Dr. Oden, I don't describe humanity, I describe you. It is true that you are a part of humanity, but just the same. In other words, I don't think that there is a single book which really has a message. Although modern writers speak so much about the messages, the message of Tolstoy, the message of Dostoevsky, the message of Kafka, I deny that all these messages do exist. In other words, there is no way out. No writer really tells you that because it is so and so and so, you should do so and so and so. This is what literature cannot do, while the Ten Commandments did it in a general way. And I always say that if all the messages would disappear and we would still have the Ten Commandments, we would have enough message for humanity, while individual messages really don't exist.
Let me put you on the spot for a moment. If someone called you on the phone, said the name was Franz Kafka, and asked for an appointment to see you, and brought these manuscripts for you to look over, and one of them happened to be the trial, and you read that, and he came back for consultation, what would you tell him?
Well, I would tell him the things we've told our audience here today. I would point out the conflict within the person, the sense of guilt, the feeling that there is no way out for him, as he himself feels it, within the given structure of his behavior patterns or of his personality, see? And then I would say, if we're any kind of psychiatrist or clinical psychologist, we have to try to resolve some of these conflicts to some degree so that he can function and not end up in the sense of dying. In other words, if as a psychiatrist, we've got to help people. We've got to help them find a way. Now, when I say a way, I don't mean there is a single way, but there has to be a way to live without either being so tormented that your life, like Kafka's life, is not worth the living for the sense of the pain as you feel it, or that you must kill yourself or die, or that you must be a Mr. Block. And Block is an interesting character here, who snivels and grovels but will live, which Joseph K. Refused to do. Okay? Now, does psychiatry have anything to offer? That's a real question.
I think what Dr. Owen would do, he would try to postpone the trial as long as possible.
No, I wouldn't. That's the one thing I wouldn't do.
Yes.
You know what I would do?
Yes.
Tell you this very strong. I would put him through the trial immediately within the ability of his to face those issues within his personality, and do it very intensely. And if you do that, maybe you can resolve to some degree some of these conflicts.
But Kafka denies that you could do it.
Kafka lived before the age of psychiatry.
Yes.
He was,
I would say it can be done in the degree that we will come up with an answer. The question is, Kafka could not accept an unknown God, right, or a rational and reasonable mind, and a sensuous, sexual, emotional body. He couldn't accept that. Many people can accept it, by the way, so that they can walk, if not with the utmost grace, at least without too much awkwardness through their lives. See? But more and more today, people are finding it unable to reconcile those, and they're in trouble. I mean, why psychiatry has become so popular. I mean, the very fact that people are that psychiatry is in so much demand is that more and more people are finding themselves in the exact same position of Joseph K.
Absolutely true. I feel myself sometimes that I'm not really living, but I sneak by. I smuggle myself through life. This is my feeling. And I think that many people feel the same way, which means sneak by, smuggle means today is over. Thank God for this day. And by the way, the history of the Jewish people, since I am a Jew, is actually for 2,000 years, we have smuggled ourselves through life. We were persecuted in one country, we went to another country.
Aren't they changing
you couldn't
that?
make a living from a grocery store, you made a living for stationery, and so on and so on. In a way, Kafka speaks about it because he says there is a possibility of postponing the trial so that somehow they don't kill you, but you are never free.
But Joseph K. rejects it. And
Yes,
speaks
yes.
for Kafka.
Yes, Kafka didn't like it.
Richard Nixon is faced with the same problem right now.
Yes, but he is accustomed to it.
He's accustomed.
Yeah.
He's a master at postponement, let's put
Yes,
it that way.
yes.
Dr. Lowen, one question I'd like to ask. Can Joseph K. love a woman? In other words, it seems that throughout the novel, he is not only reaching out towards a God he cannot reach, he's also reaching out towards a woman he cannot reach. The emotional problem is both
Would you
to
be
the
shocked
God
if I told you that on a very deep level they're the same thing?
Could you elaborate on
It's
that?
true, it's true.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody posed the question first, so we get, so we have someplace to go into. Was I heard?
Want a break?
No, Mr. Sheppard, could you pose that question since you're on tape and I'm not?
Okay. Could Kafka have loved a woman? Or is it Joseph K.? I think.
Joseph K.
Oh, yes.
I guess you mean, could he have loved a woman?
I can't say. Yes.
Well, in the novel.
And
In the novel, there's
also a
there's
connection with God, huh?
Well, put it this way.
Uh-huh.
In the
Yeah,
novel,
yeah.
there's a reaching,
Well,
on the one hand, for God,
right.
or to know the law, which is the same way as to be in
Know
touch with
God.
God. And on the other hand, there's a struggle to come to a woman, to love a woman, to find fulfillment in a woman. And it seems to me that you cannot reach God if you cannot love a woman, and you really cannot love a woman if you cannot reach God. And my explanation of that would be, this is personal for me, that human nature in its richest sense is godlike. The Bible says we were created in the image of God. Mm. We were endowed with grace. That's the nature of being godlike. I think civilization, slowly and progressively in a technological civilization, robs us of our grace and destroys that sense of identification with God. The thing that impresses me most about today is the awkwardness of so many people in their physical beings. We've really lost the sense of physical gracefulness, and we've lost graciousness on another hand. See? Now, that human nature that is godlike will respond with all its heart, not just with its sex, on a gentle level, with all its heart to a woman. And the interesting thing about sexuality, when your heart is in it, that it does end in a sense of radiance. There is such a thing as a glow in the sexual act when the heart is in it, you see. But that same feeling brings you close to God.
Well, Kafka got close to God in his writing, as he said many times. He was the happiest when he was writing.
I would say that you cannot, in the same time, belittle the woman as modern literature does. Belittle her all the time. In other words, if you get up in the morning and you say so, that a woman here on the street whom you see or your neighbor is nothing but a prostitute. She's ready to betray you with every other man. She means only herself and the few dollars which you will get out of it. You cannot at the same time love this woman. And since modern culture keeps on telling us all the time, every book which appears tells us the same thing, that there is nothing romantic about her. She is completely a physical being. She's not better than the bitch in the street, or a lot worse. She is sly. So by this is destroying love. And this is actually what also destroys religion, because these things go together. When you say that the world is senseless, and the woman, your neighbor, is nothing but a beast, then you are destroying the very essence of human culture, as Dr. Owen said. And it's true that these things go deeply together. And I would say that Kafka's skepticism and his great suffering was connected with this feeling that you cannot anymore believe in them, and neither can you live without them.
Well, a psychiatrist might call this some sort of separation anxiety or something.
No, they use that word differently. The separation anxiety, deals with the relationship of a child to a mother or father figure. But really what we're dealing with
from God. I mean, the separation of man from God.
Alienation, they call that. Right. And Kafka's work is known to represent the condition of alienation.
And how.
And in a sense that here is Joseph K. going through his days, unrelating in a human way to everybody around him. Fraulein Berstner is a romantic object, and he's a prostitute. You have a lawyer, you have a businessman, you have a assistant manager, you have a manager, you have an Italian comes in. But nowhere do you sense that there are people to whom you have feelings. So he really is a representative of the alienated modern man.
And people who could help him. None of these people
unless you pay him.
Are really very eager to help him, while the judge, the real judge, the Supreme Judge, is behind so many gates that there's never any way to reach him.
But he also has to go through the court procedure in the most demeaning way. He goes to the painter, Titorillo, and who gives him some advice. He says things don't look good, but he gives it. He then has to buy 3 paintings from him in payment, and they are all identical. I mean, Kafka must have been saying something about consumer societies.
Well, he's saying a lot about a whole...
And the meaninglessness of many of the things that he was surrounded by.
The whole bureaucratic structure of society as it existed.
Well, he knew that
then.
from the inside as a lawyer in an insurance
You have
institute.
to bribe everybody, yes.
Yeah.
You have to
Right.
buy
He
everything.
was a lawyer.
You have to bribe, he was a lawyer.
He knew the bureaucratic structure.
Yeah.
Isn't that true today, though?
But he lived in it. You know, he worked there for 17 years. He worked at the Workers' Insurance Institute in Prague. For 17 years, he processed the most
Miserable.
meaningless work
he saw that
insurance claims. He wrote papers about it. Would you believe? He wrote books about insurance matters.
He did?
Or pamphlets, and
Really?
yes, he advised.
Do they
people.
exist?
Yes, I don't know if they exist.
Yes.
He only quit because he was sick. He would have probably stayed there forever. Sneaking back to his sneaking back to his room to stay up all night and write his little animal stories. There's a wonderful this whole sense of I mean, one of the words, alienation, is certainly a word that you associate with Kafka. The other, I think, overwhelmingly is victim. The sense of a man trying to hide, of trying to build his castle keep. The Burrow is, I think, one of his outstanding stories, where it's the animal who is trying to hide from the world, protect itself, and is underground, making a little cell by beating its head against the soil. And his head starts to bleed, and he's happy because he knows that the walls are getting harder. You see, it's so.
There will be a place.
Yes, and unfortunately, the story ends where he hears another animal coming toward his own.
By the way, in Metamorphosis, this beetle lies under the bed. The man who became a beetle lies under the bed, hides in the bed. Yeah. It's always this idea that there is no way out. We have to hide.
Well, his sense of inadequacy was overwhelming.
But I don't know why we see. What I would like to do is not focus upon Kafka as the poor sufferer, unique.
Right.
To look at it in a broader sense. Otherwise, if the book was simply in some way autobiographical, would have a lot of interest as a literary story. But the book is also almost prophetic in one sense, as you said, and philosophic in another sense, and very astute as far as human condition is concerned. So if we have to build these castles, to protect ourselves, don't we delude ourselves, for example, when we build 33-story office skyscrapers of steel in which we burrow like little rats, and do our paperwork? See? Are we different, for example, than the kind of life? Are we living different, the kind of life Kafka did?
Mr. K, no, we are not different. We are not different. We go through the same thing. Naturally, Kafka could have, it could have happened that Kafka would have come to religion in his own way. He could have.
He did.
He could have.
He did.
He tried at least. He tried at least, but he had also the conflict because he makes this man a priest. Why doesn't he make him a rabbi? Because he was an assimilated man. He didn't live really in a Jewish society.
He knew the market.
Huh?
He knew the market.
The market, no, he didn't care about the market.
I think, too, that he wasn't talking only for himself. He was talking
for
his society. And that was a Catholic society.
Yes, this is true.
Well, can't one be religious from a secular viewpoint? In other words, it seems to me that what Kafka is talking about is conscience, not only guilt, but the pangs of conscience and the pangs of religious conscience that one can have even though one is secular.
I will tell you, I personally believe that there isn't such a thing as a secular religion. I will tell you why. Because the secular man knows only the things which he knows. He knows the laws of nature. He says, for example, the secular man today, the scientist says that billions of years ago there was some big bang, there was some accident, and the universe began to expand. It may go on expanding another few billions of years. Then it will fall back to pieces. It will become a dark spot in the cosmos, or whatever they call it. Modern science does not really give any hope to humanity. The only hope which they give you is the few years which you can live, try to live as well as possible. What does it mean as well as possible? Make the best of it, get the best jet plane, the best car. If things don't go your way, there's no comfort for you. So how can there be such a thing a secular religion. Religion is always attached to the idea that there is a hereafter, that your days, your counted days are not everything. There is something, and that there is reward and punishment, and there is an eye which watches you, and that there is such a thing as higher justice. Without this kind of belief, there is no comfort in the world altogether. This is the reason why the Nazis and the communists have become so merciless. Their mercilessness is actually pure logic from their point of view. Because if there is no God and there is no higher justice, why should not Hitler and Stalin do just as much as possible to stay in power? Why shouldn't they kill and lie and this is what's going on in the whole of society.
If there is a higher justice.
We must stop a minute.
What's up? When Mr. Singer is talking to you, Al, he's off mic. So if you want to play, could you move your chair?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I was talking.
Take a minute out.
So you're all right, Mr. Singer. It's Mr. Sundell who's when you're talking to him in the corner.
Tell me, the words which I read now will be there.
No.
They're fine, but just in the future we want to keep
Okay,
adding
fine.
So that when
Good.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. I am sorry.
Let me throw another aspect of the book out for your consideration. Tell you a little about it as I experience it, in psychiatric work with people. Mr. Sheppard, you mentioned that there's a sense of horror about this book. And there is, I think, nightmarish quality almost. This man's arrested, he doesn't know why. Forces, dark forces, everybody's dressed in black, against whom he doesn't know who they are really, doesn't know what their position is, but they act upon him and to some extent eventually control his life. And I think you can't, escape the sense of horror, in this book. Well, horror is a different word. Let me talk about this for a moment. The horror also comes in the black and white dreamlike quality. As I say, there's a quality, a sense of almost, it's a nightmare that Joseph K. goes through for a whole year. Horror has an unbelievable effect upon people. It's something you can't believe. The nature of horror is that it's unbelievable, beyond comprehension to a rational or feeling person. And what it does to a person is that whatever he feels, he can't even believe his own feelings. Now, I have worked with people who have gone through a childhood where there was horror in their experience. For example, a father mercilessly beating another child while my patient, for example, looked on. And in the end, he couldn't react emotionally because it was too horrible. He was stunned by it. There was no way of responding.
And you lost the feeling of reality, actually.
Of reality.
Yeah, this is what it is.
Right.
Yes.
You lost the feeling of reality.
Of reality, yeah.
Now, there is a sense in which we live in a condition of horror today. I want to talk about it for a moment because the effect of horror is always to diminish your sense of your own feelings, your inner being, And probably the most common problem that patients come to psychiatrists today, strangely, is not anxiety. They are anxious. It is depression on the one hand, but depression tied with a sense of I'm not feeling much. Depression is basically that. I mean, they've lost feeling, just feeling. They don't feel love, but they don't feel sad. They don't cry either. And they don't feel sadness or sorrow, and they don't feel joyful, and they don't even feel angry. And many times you can't get them angry. It's a whole dissociation from feeling produced by horror. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing I think that produces this in our culture, strangely, as it produced it in Kafka's time, is an unnatural way of living. When I say unnatural, I'll specify specifically, a divorce from nature. Nowhere, for example, in the trial are there any mention of plants or the green countryside or the blue sky. And to the degree to which all of us live in an artificial world, divorced from a sense of nature, we're going to lose contact with our feelings, eventually not be able to trust our feelings, because in that kind of a culture only the mind is able to function, and they end up and end up in a state that Joseph K. ended up in.
Well, he was so alienated that he was also alienated from his own death, which is the saddest thing.
No, but look at it.
He can say like a dog.
Like a dog, yeah.
But don't look at it as Joseph K. again, because that's too easy to do. There are many people who've died, alienated or in touch with their death. Look at it in terms of why he was alienated. See, in other words, what is Kafka telling us about Joseph K.? He says he gets up in the morning and he goes to his bank and he works in an office and he works sometimes from 8 o'clock till nighttime, and then he goes back to a room in a house, and nowhere has he talked about spring, summer, an animal that plays, a child. There isn't a child in the book. And he's saying when these things go out of your life, when you live in that kind of a world, you are a Joseph K.
This is true. In this book is a feeling of non-reality. That it is real and it's not real. I have this feeling every day when I get up and I read the New York Times.
That's right.
Or some other newspaper. I read about all these wars and all this horrors and all this crime, and suddenly I have a feeling that